chapter 19, verse 1. Now the two angels, remember last week there were three? Two of them are sent to Sodom to see what's going on. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw, he stood up to meet them and bowed down to the ground. And he said, "Now behold, my lords." Just note all the seeing, beholding, appearing language. Remember, this is all in like 3 weeks. It's going to kind of come to a head. And he said, "Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, but we shall spend the night in the public square." Yet he strongly urged them. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them. He baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them." But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now, look, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Please, let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do not do anything to these men because they've come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Get out of the way." And they also said, "This one came in as a foreigner and already he's acting like a judge. Now we'll treat you worse than them." So they pressed hard against Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men, these are the 2 visitors, reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, from the small to the great, so that they became weary to find the doorway. Then the 2 men said to Lot, "Whom else do you have here? Son-in-law, sons, daughters, whomever you have in the city, bring out of the place. We're about to destroy this place because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord's destroying the city." But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be joking. And when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. So the men grasped his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters because of the compassion of the Lord upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. And when they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the surrounding area. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "No." Literally. "Oh no, my lord. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you've magnified your compassion, which you've shown by saving my life, but I can't escape to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me, and I'll die." Now, behold, this town is near to flee to, and it's small. Please let me escape there. Isn't it small? So that my life may be saved. And he said to him, "Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there. I can't do anything until you arrive there." Therefore, the town was named Zoar. And the sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. And then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the surrounding area and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife from behind him looked. She became a pillar of salt. Oh, now Avraham, remember him? Avraham got up early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, back last chapter. He'd been standing there interceding for these cities. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the surrounding area. And behold, he saw the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. So it came about when God destroyed the cities of the surrounding area that God remembered Avraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Nothing interesting to see here at all, is there? Okay. If you recall, early on in this study, when Avraham and Lot had that controversy because they're competing flocks and so forth, and Avraham said, just wherever direction you want to go, that's yours. Lot looked down on this lush valley, well-watered like the Garden of Eden, and it was this Jordan River Valley plain area that was inhabited by these people. And Sodom was there, Gomorrah was there, Zoar was there, these various cities. And so this is like the well-watered land that was full of its own ways of doing things and its own ways of seeing what was right and wrong. And this whole passage, we're going to call back to this a few times in this study, but this whole passage is a pattern. It's worded in such a way to remind the reader of the flood story. A lot of the same things are going on here, just numerous and profound ways, and we'll see that. But it also calls back to the original fail in Genesis chapter 3. It also somewhat calls back to the narrative of Cain and Abel, especially Cain. It calls forward to the Passover narrative and prophetically to the Babylonian exile that comes much later. So when Sodom is mentioned in various places in the Bible, for example, in Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Jesus in Matthew 10 and 11, in Luke chapter 10, Jude, Jesus' brother, in verse 7, who connects this story with Genesis chapter 6 and the whole sons of God, daughters of men thing, or to Revelation chapter 11 when it is mentioned. The biblical authors are inviting us to see more than just the particular sins that are specific to this city, Sodom, but also to see this pattern that has developed now in the scriptures of sin, self-ruin, and then finally justice being done and what that actually means and what it looks like. But there is a really cool, that's the macro pattern, but there's a really cool micro pattern based on what we just studied last week. If you remember last week, we started with looking how parallelism works in the Bible, how there'll be a line sometimes in a poem like in Proverbs, and then another line that seems to be almost the same thing, but a little bit different. And it's like having stereoscopic vision, where you can see the same basic concept, but in two slightly different ways, and it gives you a fuller picture. And it's not just lines of poetry that are developed this way by the biblical authors, but the stories themselves are told in such a way, they're events that happen, but the way that they're told is to invite that same kind of reflection. So, for example, we'll go to this little chart in Abraham chapter 18, where Avraham is meeting these three supernatural visitors. In verse 1, we have Avraham sitting by the tent door. Well, we just saw in verse 1 of Lot and the two divine visitors, Lot is sitting by the city gate. They're both sitting. Abraham, or Avraham, ran to meet them, and then he bowed in verse 2 of chapter 18. Chapter 19, Lot stood up to greet them and bowed. And you're like, there's a little bit of similarity between these two. I wonder if that continues. In verse 3 of chapter 18, you have Avraham saying, "My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight," he's inviting them into his home or to eat with him. And then Lot in verse 2 says, "Now behold, my lords, turn aside." In chapter 18, verses 4 and 5, you have Avraham saying, "Wash your feet, and after that you may go on." Here, Lot is saying, "Wash your feet, and then go on your way." This is not accidental. This is very intentional, to draw the careful Torah reader into comparing these two scenes. Verse 8, they ate in chapter 18. Chapter 19, verse 3, they ate. Chapter 18, he's like, "Where is your wife, the Isha?" In verse 5, "Where are the men, the Ishim?" Sarah laughs, and tzakak is to laugh. Yitzhak is why her son will be named Laughter eventually. But she tzakaked in verses 12, 13, and 15 in chapter 18. Well, here, he appeared to his sons-in-law to be tzakakin, right? I'm melding English and Hebrew, which is horrible, but you get the idea. In verse 20 of chapter 18, it says, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great." Well, in verse 13 here, their outcry has become so great. And then finally, in chapter 18, you have this beautiful passage of Avraham's intercession for Sodom, which is now put on comparison, so you can compare and contrast that with Lot's intercession. But his intercession is a little different, isn't it? But he intercedes for Tzoar, but he has entirely different motives. Okay, let's look at verse by verse. Chapter 19, verse 1, 2 angels, Malakim, came to Sodom. Remember, Sodom means scorched. In the evening, as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom, and when Lot saw them, he stood up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. So these 2 angels are now explicitly mentioned in this part of the text as being Malakim. Malakim is a word for spiritual being messengers, or who are carrying messages. It doesn't necessarily mean that's their essential nature, but it's their role, at least at this point in the story. But they deliver messages in the service of Yahweh, and they're spiritual beings. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're always fully separated from Yahweh. Thus, the angel of the Lord is sometimes, wait, is this the angel of the Lord, or is this the Lord? But although the visitors appear as human men, we are told, explicitly here, the reader is told, these are heavenly beings. And they came in the evening. Why is the text bother saying that they're coming in the evening? I think that one reason is to specifically contrast with chapter 18, when they came to Avraham in the morning. So the full light of that encounter with Avraham at Mamre is now contrasted with this impending darkness of the encounter with Lot at Sodom. You see how it sets that scene creatively? Lot, I mean, otherwise, why mention it? So literally, the claim is that yes, they came in the morning to Avraham, and they came in the evening to Lot. But that's not a detail that the biblical author would mention unless they were trying to accomplish something with it. I think this is what they're trying to accomplish. Lot was sitting at the gate. So this sitting at the gate in these times in the ancient Near East meant that you were an important person in the city. And so Lot at least believes that he is an important person in the city, probably because if you remember a few pages ago, his uncle, saved all their heinies, in that big battle, remember? And Uncle Avram, he went in there and saved them all from this nation, or this 4-army confederation that came against them. So he figures, I'm important now. Verse 2, he said, now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house. Spend the night, wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, no, we shall spend the night in the public square. So again, all the seeing language, behold, he's like, oh, look, I want you to see this. The my lords, actually in Hebrew, it's my Lord. It's Adonai. The translators have helped us out there, but just interestingly, he says, my Lord. Turn aside. Sometimes this word in the Hebrew Bible can mean repent. In other words, change your mind, change your direction. And spend the night, wash your feet, rise early, go your way. This is the normal, proper hospitality offer that you would expect from anybody in the ancient Near East who wouldn't be considered horribly wicked. This is just the right thing to do. It's doing right by somebody. And this is Lot's righteousness. He's just doing the right thing. No, we're going to spend the night in the public square. So this is a bit surprising, because who, traveling in the ancient Near East, would refuse the comfort of somebody offering their home and want to just stay out in the public square? But the reason is these Malachim are on a mission. They're on a mission to determine whether the inhabitants of the city have ruined themselves, like the outcry has occurred. And finding out, like I said last week, it doesn't mean that Yahweh is ignorant. It means that they have an opportunity to do the right thing, the inhabitants of this city. And obviously, it's easier done in the public square than in somebody's home where, you would be safe and so on. But, verse 3, yet he strongly urged them, so they turned aside to him, entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them. And what was that feast? Baked unleavened bread. And they ate. So the Hebrew word for he strongly urged, this is going to come up again in the story, is the word patsar. It's almost like forcing them. Almost. It's like pressing hard to get them to do this. So this unleavened bread deal, I want you to contrast this with last chapter, how Avraham and Sarah treated the supernatural beings. He prepared this feast of a good and tender calf, a tov calf, right? And milk products and just all kinds of delicious food, all this bread. So the contrast is almost embarrassing. Avraham, remember, he picked the hard life of the hills, and he provides this lavish feast. Lot chose the lavish lifestyle of the plain, and he gives them crackers, right? It's just interesting. It's interesting. I think we're supposed to note this contrast. Verse 4, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old. All the people from every quarter. So these are men, these are males. They're males of the city named scorched or burnt. And they're city people. So first mention in the Bible of city is who builds it? Cain. First mention of any kind of ir in Hebrew, city, is Cain building one. So, and bad things tend to be associated. So we haven't come to the redemption of the city yet. This is like dangerous stuff. And this isn't just a gang of miscreants or a gang of bandits or something. These people represent multiple generations. They represent all the trades, all the social classes. They're from every quarter of the city. So this isn't just an aberration. This is the people of Sodom. And they called to Lot and said to him, they speak, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know or have relations with them." So it's a question, but it's really a command. And this relations, and this is a Hebrew word that's a euphemism for sex. They're like, bring them out, we want to have sex with them. It is the word "know" that sometimes can mean other things, but the context of the story, they're not asking them to come out so that they can become pen pals, okay? It's not what's happening here. So in this passage that we're going to read, there are four, actually there's five. I'm gonna describe them like Cat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hurricanes. And they're all bad, but they grow in intensity as you see what's going on here. And the order of intensity is different to the ancient Israelites than it is to us. And when I say intensity, I don't mean that one sin is worse than another, but the shock of it. Like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. And the first shock, Cat 1 hurricane, is that these men want to engage in homosexual behavior. And the Israelites who are lensing this is not trying to teach the Israelites that homosexual behavior is bad, because the Israelites who are listening to this for the first time already know that. They have the Torah of Moses. They have the laws that have been given by Moses, and some of them explicitly point out that homosexual behavior is not to be tolerated in Israel. So they don't need to be taught that it's bad. They don't use this to teach people that homosexuality is bad. They've already got that, okay? And it's also not particularly overly surprising that these men want to do it, because the ancient Israelites have already got this framework that, those inhabitants of Canaan, they're into all this kind of stuff and worse, and it's kind of how they behave. But nevertheless, reading their stories of Abraham, having this pop up in the story is still a shock. And like I said, it's a Cat 1 hurricane. Nobody wants to read about this, but it's being put in front of their faces. I know this is so controversial today. I know it is. And there's some really powerful arguments being made that this whole story has nothing to do with homosexuality. And I think where some of that is coming from is these other categories of hurricanes. But I think we have to start with the basis of how the Israelites themselves, in the day this was being written and first shared, would have lensed it. And because they had the laws of Moses, they had already a preconception understanding that this is behavior that would not be acceptable for them. It's in the Bible, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with this, but in the Bible, homosexual behavior is a sin, but it's also a symbol of more than just the specific sin. It's put on comparison with idolatry. And this is what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 1. It's like a consequence of idolatry. So, and note that we're not talking about romance again here. This is not the guys of Sodom saying, we have these feelings of love for them, and we want to date them and romance them. It's not that. And that leads us to the Cat 2 hurricane, which it's not in your notes, but the Cat 2 hurricane comes later. But second in intensity was how they eventually treat Lot, who is supposed to be among them. He was responsible by association with their rescue at one time, and he's a foreigner and immigrant in their land. And to the Israelites, one of the laws is you got to treat those immigrants with respect and love, because that was you in Egypt at one time. Well, he's been treated very badly as well. So that's a Cat 2 hurricane for them. They're like, you shouldn't treat him this way. The next level of shock and surprise to them, the Cat 3 hurricane, which I have here as shock level 2, is gang rape. And gang rape, it's not like, oh, those Canaanites, yeah, they do gang rape all the time. That's anywhere in the ancient Near East, that would be considered really, really bad. And it's a descent into chaos. It's descent into a moral chaos. It's kind of decreating yourself because there's no way that you're doing right by or being righteous towards, doing right by other people in a situation like that. Severe, major hurricane. The next level of shock, Cat 4, and to them this is even a bigger deal. I know, this is like reversed in our minds, but to them, huge deal, is a violation of the ancient hospitality rules. Ironclad expectations in the ancient Near East. Respecting strangers under your roof, respecting strangers that are under an inhabitant of your city's roof. That's like, think of like violating the rights of an embassy of another country, except maybe 100 times worse. You don't do that. I mean, you never do that. But they're doing it, and it's an outrageous amount of chaos and evil and wickedness in the realm of showing justice, mishpat, because justice in the ancient Near East, everybody agreed on this. Well, there's even, that's a Cat 4 hurricane. Does it get any worse than that? Well, in the ancient Israelites, like, no, that's as bad as it can get. But for the Torah reader, there's one more level. There's one more level. So these are angels. These are supernatural beings that these men want to gang rape. Now, at this point, the text does not tell us whether the men of Sodom knew that they were supernatural beings, that they were angels. It doesn't say that at this time they realized that they were violating this spiritual boundary, which is you don't violate it. The last time that happened in a sexual way in Genesis chapter 6, there were the Nephilim and the flood. So big deal, right? But the reader knows that they're supernatural beings. So there's all kinds of lights going off in the minds of the Torah readers who are hooked into this stuff saying, oh no, this is bad. Okay, so the very first time that boundary violation happened was non-sexual. And it was in the garden, chapter 3, when a supernatural being is having this highly rebellious conversation with the images of God, especially the woman, the Eitzer, the one who's supposed to be the first responder here. And there's a grasping of that, which is not good before its time. So this is the fail, is what we call the fall in Genesis chapter 3. The next time it happens is sexual in nature, and it's when these creatures who are spiritual beings, but they become corrupt, they take the daughters of men and marry them, and then there's these Nephilim that show up, and the earth is filled with violence, and it led to this cosmic decreation of the flood. The next time it happens is non-sexual. Again, so it's like non-sexual, sexual, non-sexual, and this is the next non-sexual thing, is the building of the Tower of Babel, which is an attempt to cross that boundary from the human side. We want to get the top of this tower into the heavens. We want to remerge heaven and earth that was lost at the garden, at the fail. This is our attempt to merge heaven and earth. And of course, that led to a flood of confusion. So this is, remember, non-sexual, sexual, non-sexual, this is the sexual one. And it's an attempt by humans to have sex with spiritual beings. The people of Sodom, the idea here is they've embraced decreation, they've embraced ruin, they've embraced their own destruction through this thing called avon, or iniquity. So, verse 6. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Ra'ah. So far, so good, right? He's pleading with them not to act ra'ah, but I want you to notice he calls them brothers. It's a little thing they've inserted in this conversation, the biblical authors, that he said. They don't have to say everything he said. But they record that he explicitly said, my brothers. He's talking about these people, Cat 1 through 5 hurricane people, as his brothers. Verse 8. Now look, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with any man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only don't do anything to these men because they've come under the shelter of my roof. So Lot is willing, in order to defend the law of hospitality and thus his reputation, because his reputation's all wrapped up in, I mean, if you let somebody come under harm under your roof, that's like the most, it's just like a horrible thing, right, to your reputation. You lose all kinds of honor. Well, to him, it's better to just offer up his 2 daughters. He's messed up. And the biblical authors want you to see that he is messed up. He's got a sort of a sense of justice, but it's so warped. So, in other words, he just called these men his brothers. They kind of are. He's kind of become warped too. So, see the similarity when Avram used Sarai as a shield to preserve his life back in Genesis chapter 12 with Pharaoh. Now Lot is taking this whole next level. He's taking these women, using them as shields to his sense of honor and his reputation. Let him be raped. He's like, do to them what you like. Literally, do, in the Hebrew, do what seems tov in your eyes. So he's encouraging them to have their own view of tov and ra, good and bad, Genesis 3, in this matter of gang rape. The story is no fun at all, is it? This is horrible. But they said, get out of the way. And they also said, you know, this one came as a foreigner and already he's acting like a judge. Now we'll treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot, moved forward to break the door. So they're despising Lot's immigrant status. We talked about that. He's acting like a judge, they're saying. Even though his offer is so warped, they still see it, and it's just as bad as their intentions in some way. It's still seeing it as judgy because he's like, who are you to school us in the hospitality rules and the rules of morality and what we should and shouldn't do? So what they do, they pressed hard. They patzar. Remember that word is used when Lot pressed hard for the angelic visitors to come into his home. Now they're pressing him hard. Verse 10. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So the Malachim, they've obviously seen enough. They came to give an opportunity to the people of the city, and the people have had their opportunity. And this is how they act. They've proven the outcry. So they shut the door. This is a callback to the Noah story when Noah reached out his hand, brought the dove into the ark, and Yahweh shut the door of the ark. I mean, this is all like copy-paste language. And it's a clue that what we're about to see is another type of flood. Another type of flood, that kind of a judgment. Verse 11. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house with blindness. Supernatural act. From the small to the great. And they became weary of trying to find the doorway. So Nakah struck, this is a word that's used again during the plagues, later on in Exodus. But the whole idea here of this blindness is these men of Sodom are spiritually blind. They cannot see what is right. So all the Malachim did was bring that into reality for them. What they have done to themselves has now become a physical thing. This is kind of in miniature what's going to happen to the city itself. What they've already brought upon themselves is going to show up physically. So, and then they became weary of trying to find the doorway. So they've been blinded. They know it's a supernatural event. Now this is, it's clear to anyone reading this, even if we weren't told that these were angels, that these are supernatural beings. But they keep groping until they get tired. So they're not giving up trying to rape these men, even though now it's clear. These are divine beings. They are supernatural beings. So you see how the text actually leads us to this place of seeing this boundary violation as not just being ignorant, but intentional. Verse 12, then the men said to Lot, well, whom else do you have here? A son-in-law, your sons and daughters, whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we're about to destroy this place because their outcry has become so great before the Lord sent us to destroy it. This is such an important passage. So the Malachim are offering Lot this offer of collateral mercy to family members, to extended family by marriage that aren't necessarily genetically related, and then whoever's yours. Whoever's yours is not just family necessarily. It's whoever Lot wants to say, okay, I'm vouching for this one. This could be colleagues. This could be any women that his wife knows. This could be servants. It could be whoever. It could be the baker, right? Whoever he wants to say, okay, this one's under me because, my kids went to school. This is a broad offer for Lot to extend this collateral mercy. This is a huge concept here. And they're saying now we're about to shakath, we're about to ruin. And this is the idea of the Genesis flood. This ruin happened on the earth because of the violence of these humans. So the Lord sped up the ruin. Well, the self-ruin of Sodom has been aptly displayed. So Yahweh's command to ruin the city, it's matching the ruin that's already there. But apparently Lot can bring out anyone. He can bring them out. So what does he, outcry, it's another, we could spend an hour on outcry, but it's something that comes up to the Lord, sometimes even from the ground, calling out for justice. So remember, Abraham's request in intercession was, if there's only 10 righteous in the city, will you spare the city? So now it's on the other end. It's the angelic visitors are saying, man, whoever you want to bring out, you want to call yours, you bring them out. Family members, if they're yours, bring them out. And remember in the whole, if you want to call it a bargaining, whatever Abraham asked for, he got. And the situation, I think, in comparison, you'd be like, whoever Lot asks for, is it likely he's going to get? Based on the comparison of 18 and 19? Oh, sure. I think that's what's supposed to be in our minds. So what does Lot do? Verse 14, he went and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and said, get out of this place. The Lord's destroying the city. Now, why am I saying it that way? Because I think how he says it is informed by the next sentence. However he said it, he appeared to his sons-in-law to be joking. And we usually put all the blame on the sons-in-law. Say, well, those evil, wicked sons-in-law, there's something serious being said to them. And I think that's a legitimate thing we can reflect on, for sure. It's a traditional way of approaching this, and I think that that's there. But I think that there's something on Lot too. Because what does Lot do when they think he's joking? He leaves it alone. He stops. They hesitate. He does nothing. Does he go to anybody else? No. Let's contrast this with how the angels treat him. All right. Verse 15. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife. Same word, up, in these two, up, let's go. Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. He knows they're not joking, right? But he's lingering. So did the men say, all right, and leave him? They took him by the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters. Why? Because the compassion of the Lord was upon him. Was Lot's compassion on his sons-in-law? He would have taken him by the hand. He gave up. The angels aren't giving up. I really think we're supposed to see a contrast here. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. Okay. Verse 17. When they had brought them outside, one said, he just gives them clear instructions. This is very clear. You don't usually get clear instructions from the Lord like this. This is really clear, step by step. Escape for your life. Don't look behind you. Don't stay anywhere in the surrounding area. Escape to the mountains. Is that clear? But Lot said to them, no, he doesn't want to do it. No, my Lord. Behold, your servants found favor in your sight. You've magnified your compassion. I recognize this, which you've shown me by saving my life, but I can't escape the mountains. Who wants to live in the mountains? The disaster will overtake me, I'll die. So he recognizes the rescue, but he refuses to participate with obedience to the command. He's not going to believe that what the angel said will actually save him. He wants an accommodation, kind of like Cain. He's like, oh, no, I'm going to die. You got to do something else. Verse 20. Now, behold, this town is near to flee to, and it's small. Let me escape there. It's just small. My life, this is a town that's supposed to be destroyed with all the other towns. So Lot intercedes for the small town. But is he interceding out of compassion for its people? No, it's because he doesn't want to live in the mountains. He wants to live in a town. That's why he's interceding. So contrast that with Abraham's intercession in chapter 18. Just if there's any right, he's interceding for everyone. Collateral mercy. If there's just a handful of righteous and he's got no skin in the game. With Lot, it's all about his skin in the game. He wants rescue, but he wants it on his terms as well. Verse 21. And this is what the angelic visitor says to him. Behold, I grant you this request. He's getting everything he asked for. Not to overthrow the town of which you've spoken. Hurry, escape there. Can't do anything till you arrive there. Therefore, the town was named Insignificant. That's what Zoar means. It's so small. So this is extreme mercy. This is extreme mercy, way beyond what Lot deserves and his family. Well, the sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. They made it there. And then the Lord rained. This is the same word for the rain of the flood. But this time it's not Mabul. It's not the flood waters. It's brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. But it's out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the surrounding area and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew in the ground. So it's no longer like the Garden of Eden like we read about in chapter 13. It's now forever ruined because of the ruin that the iniquity or the avon of the people had brought upon it. And destruction, there's a word here that has been destroyed or ruined. It's also the word avon. So avon can be used for iniquity. It can also be used for destruction because the two things are wrapped together. So I don't want you to think that the people reading this in ancient Israel for the first time would have been like, that happened? There was brimstone falling from heaven on this city? Whoa, that is a wild story. The reason I don't want you to think that is because the ancient Israelites who heard this for the first time had already heard lots of different ways of telling the story of why this area had been destroyed by some sort of fiery conflagration from the skies. This was well known in the times of their ancestors. Long before Moses and his writing team wrote this account, there had already been stories in the surrounding cultures about the destruction of this area. So they're not trying to give them something new. What they're trying to give them is a new framework of explanation for why it happened. Does that make sense? The fact that there was a destruction there at one time, everybody knew. This is why it happened. But Lot's wife from behind him looked back. She became a pillar of salt. So keep in your head her looking back. She looked upon Sodom and Gomorrah, told not to, of course. They did everything they were told not to do, and one or the other of the family members. And it gets worse with the daughters. We'll find out next week. But she looks back. There's a camaraderie and connection that she has with this kind of city that now she is participating in its ruin. She's participating in its ruin from her vision, and now she's participating in its ruin also physically. So there, Lot and his family, great, should be like a sitcom. No, it's terrible. Lot is not the best father. Verse 27. Now Avraham got up early in the morning, again this is a morning time for him again, and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. So this is the place where the Lord carried on that bargaining with him, where the Lord invited him to intercede for these cities. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the surrounding area, and behold, he saw, he's looking. And behold, he saw the smoke of the land ascending like the smoke of a furnace. So, wait, how can he look? Because Lot's wife looked and she was salinated, right? Abraham looks and is just cool. And that's because of how each of them sees. This is one of the themes of the Abraham story is there's different ways to look. The way she was looking was apparently very different than what we've learned about Abraham and his way of looking, which is a look of compassion and intercession. So there's one way of doing right what seems in our own eyes to be right, and it leads to ruin. And then there's the lens of mercy and intercession which leads to life. And that's the message the biblical authors are trying to send by putting Abraham's looking immediately after the looking of Lot's wife. Verse 29, so it came about. This is the summary. So it came about. When God destroyed the cities of the surrounding area, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So God remembered Abraham this is word for word. The pinnacle, climax, center of the chiasm of the flood story. The hinge on which everything in the flood story turns is Genesis 8, chapter 1, that God remembered Noah. So this is a clue from the biblical authors, this is a pattern for the flood story. And by remembering, this is like calling to his mind. This is not like I forgot, remembering. But by remembering Abraham, Yahweh rescued this undeserving and unrighteous remnant, Lot and his family, for no reason than that a humble person cared for them enough to intercede for his enemies. So we're going to read, I think we have time. Gordon Wenham, which is a wonderful scholar, he says of this whole incident, talking about Genesis 18 and 19. Avraham, an old man, hurries to prepare a banquet for unknown visitors at the hottest part of the day, and he's described as teaching righteousness and equity and shown to be on the most intimate terms with God. Lot, a younger man, is equally hospitable, prepares a banquet for his guests, and he persuades them to stay the night in his home. Indeed, his hospitality seems to go too far when he doesn't simply risk his own life by going out to face the mob alone, but offers his daughters to appease their lust. However, when he's told to leave the city, he dallies. And then having left, he pleads merely for his own convenience to take refuge in Zoar rather than flee to the hills. His slowness to obey the divine command suggests his righteousness is less than complete, you think. But when last seen, he is lost, and this is coming next week, he has lost his home, his goods, and his wife, and is being shamefully treated by his daughters. That he survived at all is ascribed to Avraham. When God ruined the cities, God remembered Avraham, and he sent Lot out of danger. The flood involved the destruction of the whole human race, except Noah and his family. Here, the destruction involves a group of cities and the saving of one man and his family. And my words, not his, collaterally, the people of Zoar. Noah is seen as a second Adam, from whom all humanity descended. The destruction of Sodom, though not as awesome as the flood, speaks once again of the terrible depravity to which human society can descend and the need for redemption. So if Noah is seen as a second Adam, Avraham, is probably viewed as a third Adam, the new hope of mankind. It was Noah's sacrifice that mollified God's anger after the flood and spared the world another annihilation. Now the narrator suggests that it is Abraham's prayer that saved righteous Lot. He did do one righteous thing, right? And that in Abraham, all the nations of the earth may hope to find blessing. All right, so first audience, what are they thinking at this point? I mean, one of the things they're thinking is that the opportunities that Yahweh is repeatedly giving the men of Sodom, it's extreme. It's extreme. All these opportunities. The chaos that follows doing what seems right to us, O ancient Israelite, it's the path to ruin. And therefore, it's an invitation or it's an outcry to God to partner in that ruin. God will speed it up. And the forced rescue of Lot and his family is compassion on the next level. They don't even want to go. But the Lord just takes them by the hand. Like, I'm going to rescue you. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to save your lives. And maybe they're thinking as they're hearing this in the wilderness, perhaps with Moses, that, maybe this quote unquote better life of Egyptian slavery and all the cucumbers that we had there, and everything, maybe that's not really what we should be after. All right, us today. Remember that the purpose of Genesis 19 was not just to teach the Israelites that homosexual behavior was wrong. Ancient Israelites already had that lens. This is not anything new to them to know. But the sin of Sodom, it wasn't any less than that. Don't let anybody tell you that it's less than that. Well, they can tell you that, but don't believe it. But it was far, far more than that. It was doing what seemed right in their own eyes on every level. Sin narratives in the Bible don't exist so that we can more easily point out specks in other people's eyes, right? That's not why they're there. They exist so we can look in the mirror and remove logs from our eyes. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, I think would have been a good verse for Lot. Walk with the wise and become wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. I think that's applicable. It's a good verse for us too, isn't it? Watch who you're hanging out with. Show mercy, show love, but don't get your good relationships from people that only want to do what seems right in their eyes. Anyway, so, okay. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on this very chipper chapter in the Bible, y'all?
I try to look at this class in two ways. I put on my tourist hat and go through the way they would be reading it and learning it back then, and then look in the mirror afterwards and how New Testament reflects from Old Testament and Old goes into New, yes. Right? And then how God tells us he doesn't want us to be lukewarm. And when I look at Lot, I feel like he was lukewarm. He knew and believed in God, but yet he still hesitated. Yeah. Right? And he still called them their brothers. So the people that we start to blend and hang out with are the people that we start to conform to, right? Yeah. And then we always have a tendency of looking back. So even though we're strong in our faith and we're learning, we continue to learn, we have a tendency of looking back to our past. And is it okay to turn back there and go back that way that I was doing it? When it gets too hard, following the Christian way, right? We always look back to that other way. And then that's when Jesus tells us, right, not to be like Lot's wife and look back and to remember that. And there's so many times I feel that we do that. And it's just, it's very humbling when you read these things. And it is a bad story, but then there's a learning to that for myself and for the people that I'm a part of and with, that it's not necessarily just about the sins, right? That's a big part of the story, but it's also about how he behaved, and her turning back and looking how we do that ourselves a lot of times.
Yeah, the men of Sodom were just doing what the men of Sodom do. It's horrible, but what does the righteous one do?
I can't remember where it is in the New Testament, but there's no really indication that Lot finds Sodom appalling at all. But there is a place in the New Testament where they say how Lot was upset by what was going around him,
Yes.
which is interesting because in the next chapter, jumping ahead, he'll flee Zoar, but shouldn't Sodom have been just as bad?
Yeah, we're going to definitely meditate on that next week as far as him leaving Zoar, because he does. But yeah, so, I mean, Lot was clearly upset, but what was he upset at? He was upset that the law of hospitality would be broken and make him look bad. I think that's what we're,
Yeah, and then in Judges, like what, at least he doesn't do what the guy in Judges, like throw out his daughters.
yes. Yeah, you're moving ahead to this, there's a passage in Judges which is a design pattern off of this. And in some ways, it's more disturbing. It's just, anyway, the Bible, it's not for little kids to read unless you got to filter it a little bit. But it's for a reason, and it's for our instruction. Very good, thank you. Anyone else, any thoughts? And I might take a question or two, although I'm a little afraid. Yeah.
The thing that I look at is that the character of the son and the character of the father. The father was always a congenial man, and he was ready to share and even give the best to somebody else. Lot, I think, just got carried away with the people that he was with. And I think he looks like a lot of us today, where we're already making excuses for the people that are around us. So I just see one person that just wants to blend in, the other one that wants to give everything away.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very wise reflection. Okay, so Rachel, are there any questions at all? Because if not, we can just,
Oh, there sure are.
oh my.
Okay, so we have some questions about like the two men, the two spiritual beings.
Yeah.
The beginning of the chapter.
Yeah.
Do you think that Lot knew that the angels would not be safe in the public square? Do you think he knew that they were spiritual beings?
So to the first question, did he know that they were not going to be safe in the public square? I think that the implication is that he was aware of that. But even if he, for some reason, thought that they would be safe, pressing visitors to stay in your own home is an act of honor in the ancient Near East. But I do think that the narrative leads us to this is a little bit of reading between the lines, but how I read it is that he's like trying to save them from what will surely come upon them, which was what they were trying to find out if that would happen. Of course it did, even in his home. Did he know that they were spiritual beings? The text does not give us any indication at all that he did until, of course, after the blinding incident, which at that point, yes, I would think so.
By the daughters not getting raped, is this story a part of a bigger biblical literary pattern about how God looks out over women?
There is a huge literary pattern about God's purpose for woman, and which is an eternal, glorious, blow your mind kind of teaching that I wish we will get into at some point, but it has to do with your identity, no matter who you are, and his purpose for you. In this case, I think that this is setting up something that's going to happen with Lot and his daughters, how his disregard for their lives is going to come back as a disregard for their father and for doing something that's right in their eyes, and it's a pattern that he has started. And next week is also going to be traumatic. So,
Why salt?
why salt?
Yeah,
It's a good question. I have to do more homework on that. I was just thinking that earlier today. It's like, I know there's got to be more. Most of the commentaries point out, truly, that there are salt-like pillar monuments, if you will, natural formations in that area, and that this would have been easily hooked onto by the biblical authors to say, oh, and you know what that is? That's the one who looked back. But I think there's more to it than that. But yeah, I'll do more homework, and maybe in 5 years I have better response.
Did Abraham know the event of Noah and the flood at this time?
Yeah, the text doesn't say. The text does not say if Abraham knew about how the flood is explained as Genesis explains it. He would surely have known that there was a flood, because all people in the ancient Near East at that time, no matter whether they had heard of Yahweh or not, had the flood story in their minds. There were different types of flood stories, but this was a well-known thing. So the fact that one occurred, he would certainly have known. Would he have known it as the Moses team wrote it out? That's an unknown. So, okay, next week, the foot stays on the gas pedal of traumatizing things. There's more to this, and it's very uncomfortable, but I think you can see how there's a strong purpose for what the biblical authors were writing in this that go beyond just, hey, this sin is bad, this is the way to act. I mean, there's some deep work that's being done here. That the careful biblical meditator is gonna come out with like all kinds of mind-blowing things. And something similar is going to happen next week in our minds, even though some of the stories are difficult. Thank you for hanging in there. You guys are amazing.